He was a millionaire CEO, rich, powerful, untouchable. But when he got into his car one quiet evening, he found a 7-year-old girl in the back seat whispering, "No one comes for me." What happened next changed both of their lives forever. It was the kind of evening that felt like the world was finally slowing down. The sun hung low, casting a soft golden light over the polished windows of downtown Chicago's skyline. People hurried to catch trains, couples held hands, and cars crawled through traffic with tired drivers dreaming of dinner and rest. Jacob Miller, 37, stepped out of the tall glass tower that bore his company's name, Miller Tech. The automatic doors slid open for him like the world always had. Dressed in a custom navy suit, with expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor, he looked like a man who had everything. He didn't just run a company. He owned it. Millions of dollars in contracts signed that week. Private meetings with senators. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. Life was smooth, sharp, and efficient. He nodded at the valet, who handed over the keys to his black SUV. It was spotless, elegant, and loaded with technology that cost more than most families' yearly income. The underground garage was quiet, cool, and dimly lit, with only the faint hum of ventilation filling the silence. Jacob opened the door, tossed his briefcase onto the passenger seat, and slid behind the wheel. He took a deep breath, ready for his favorite podcast, a quiet drive home, maybe a glass of scotch by the fireplace. But then something. A flicker in the rearview mirror. A movement. Jacob narrowed his eyes, heart skipping. He leaned forward slightly and stared. There, in the back seat, was a small shape he hadn't noticed before. His body tensed. He turned around fast, expecting a bag, a coat, maybe something the valet left behind. But no, a child. A little girl, no older than 7, curled up like a kitten trying to disappear. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest. Her clothes were thin, dirty, and wrinkled. Her small sneakers were worn out, soles nearly torn through. Her tangled blonde hair hung across her face like a curtain, and her pale skin looked like it hadn't felt sunlight in days. Jacob's mouth opened, but no words came. His world, his perfect, scheduled, powerful world, paused. The girl didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him, eyes wide with a fear deeper than most adults could understand. A fear that spoke of nights alone, of whispers in the dark, of people walking away. And then in the softest voice, just above a breath, she said, "No one comes for me." Jacob felt something inside him twist. Hard. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't panic. It was something deeper, something he hadn't felt since childhood. Something like recognition. Who was this child? Why was she here? And what kind of world did she come from where no one came for her? His hands, used to signing million-dollar deals, now trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. Not to call the police. Not yet. He had a more important call to make, one that didn't require a phone. Not to call the police. Not yet. He had a more important call to make, one that didn't require a phone. He had to listen. Because this little girl had just shattered the armor of a man who thought he had seen everything. But he hadn't seen her. Not until now. Jacob blinked, as if trying to clear a dream from his eyes. But the little girl didn't disappear. She was still there, tucked into the corner of his leather seat, like she belonged to another world that had suddenly collided with his. He turned fully in his seat, his voice uncertain and low. What are you doing in my car?" His tone wasn't harsh. It was confused, as if his mind couldn't quite accept what his eyes saw. A child. In his car. In his life. Where she clearly didn't belong. Or so he thought. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just looked up at him with a pair of blue eyes so round, so hollow, that they held Jacob still like gravity. "I just needed somewhere to hide," she said softly. Jacob's heart kicked in his chest. Hide? From what? He leaned forward slowly, not wanting to frighten her, his hand still resting on the center console. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily." That was it. No last name, no story, just Emily. Her voice trembled, but carried a quiet strength, like a child used to not being listened to, but speaking anyway. Her legs dangled above the floor, and she clutched the fraying hem of her shirt like it was a shield. Jacob looked at her hands, small, dirty, fingernails bitten down. A scratch ran along one arm. Nothing screamed violence, but everything whispered neglect. "How did you get in?" he asked, not accusing, just stunned. "The door was open," she said. "The man who drove it before didn't close it all the way. I crawled in when no one was looking." Jacob sat back, absorbing the weight of her words. How many people had walked past that car today? How many adults had come and gone, never noticing her? "How long have you been in here?" She shrugged. "Since this morning, I think. I had crackers in my pocket. I just wanted a place to sleep where no one would yell." Jacob swallowed hard. "They yell a lot." The words hit him like a punch in the gut. "They?" he repeated. Emily nodded. "At the foster home. They said I talk too much, that I ask for too many things. That's why no one ever keeps me. They all send me back." Her eyes stayed locked on his, not angry, but aching. "No one ever wants me." Jacob couldn't speak. He had made speeches in boardrooms filled with powerful people. He had answered questions from investors worth billions. But now, a 7-year-old girl had left him completely speechless. She didn't ask for money. She didn't demand anything. All she wanted was safety, silence, someone who wouldn't push her away. In that moment, the walls around Jacob's life, his clean, controlled empire, began to crack. Behind his success was a childhood he rarely talked about, one with hunger, with loneliness, with doors that slammed shut in his face. And here was this small, trembling soul, hiding in the back seat of his luxury car like a ghost from his past. He cleared his throat, struggling to steady his voice. "Emily, are you hungry?" She looked down. "A little, but I'm used to it." Used to it. Used to hunger, used to silence, used to being invisible. Jacob Miller had built his empire to be seen, but now he realized real strength was surviving when no one sees you. And Emily? She was stronger than he had ever been. For a long moment, Jacob just sat there, holding his phone in his hand. His thumb hovered over the screen. The number for Child Protective Services was already pulled up. It was the right thing, the adult thing, the lawful thing. "Call the authorities. Let the system take over. Let someone else handle it." That's what most people would do, but Jacob couldn't press the button. Because when he looked into Emily's eyes, he didn't just see a lost little girl. He saw himself. He saw a boy who used to sit on a sagging mattress, counting the seconds between his mom's tears in the next room. A boy who stood by the window every Friday, hoping his father's truck would pull into the driveway. But it never did. A boy who stopped asking for Christmas presents because hope hurt more than disappointment. Jacob had buried those memories under marble floors, corner offices, and million-dollar contracts. But Emily brought it all back with a whisper and a pair of shaking hands. He looked at her again. She wasn't crying. She didn't even ask him to let her stay. She just sat there, hungry and quiet, like she had already accepted that she wasn't worth the trouble. He put his phone down slowly, the screen going dark. "Let's get you something to eat," he said. Emily blinked, unsure if she heard him right. "Really?" Jacob nodded. "Yeah. You like grilled cheese?" She nodded back just once. That was the first flicker of light he saw in her. He started the engine, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't care where his GPS told him to go. He didn't care about the emails waiting. He just drove toward kindness. They found a quiet little diner off a side street, the kind of place that still had red booths, paper menus, and old music humming softly through ceiling speakers. The waitress gave them a curious look. Jacob in a crisp suit, Emily in worn-out sneakers, but didn't ask questions. She just smiled and brought water with lemon. Emily ordered grilled cheese and apple juice. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. When the plate arrived, she stared at the sandwich for a moment, like it might vanish. Then she picked it up with both hands and took a bite. And another, and another. Jacob watched in silence as she devoured the meal, chewing slowly but steadily, as if her body was used to hunger being part of her life. She didn't speak while eating. But when the plate was empty, she looked up at him. Her lips were greasy with butter. Her hands still shook a little. "Thank you," she said. Two small words, but they hit him harder than any applause he'd received from shareholders. Jacob cleared his throat. "You're welcome." There was silence between them, not the awkward kind, but the kind that builds trust, the kind that feels safe. He glanced at his reflection in the diner's window. For the first time in years, he didn't see a CEO. He saw a man who was still healing. And maybe, just maybe, a little girl who could help him do it. Kindness didn't come from wealth or power. It came from moments like this, when you choose a person over protocol. The elevator glided silently up the 51st floor of the luxury high-rise, the city lights sparkling below like scattered diamonds. Jacob stood beside Emily, his hands in his coat pockets, unsure what he was doing. Only that he couldn't leave her behind. She didn't say much during the ride. She looked around wide-eyed as they stepped into the penthouse. It was spotless, cold, gleaming marble floors, towering glass windows, and walls filled with expensive art. Everything in Jacob's home was measured, curated, controlled. Except now, there was a small girl in muddy sneakers walking across the floor like a ghost in someone else's life. He showed her the guest room, soft bed, fluffy pillows, warm lighting. She looked at it like it wasn't real. Her fingers brushed the blanket like she thought it would disappear. "You can sleep here tonight," he said gently. "Just one night," she whispered. Jacob nodded, swallowing hard. "Just one." She crawled into bed, fully clothed, and within minutes, she was asleep. Like her body had finally surrendered after years of battle. No bedtime story, no stuffed animal, just silence. He stood in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall. Then he quietly closed the door. That night, Jacob didn't sleep. He sat in his living room, the city humming outside his windows. The fireplace flickered, but he felt cold, not from the room, but from memory. Because what Emily didn't know was that he had once been her. 30 years ago, Jacob had also been a scared little boy with nowhere to go. One summer evening, after his mother didn't come home for 2 days, he climbed into the back of a stranger's car, just to sleep, just to feel safe. But when the man found him, he didn't speak softly. He yelled, dragged Jacob out, called the cops. He remembered the concrete of the police station floor, the way the officer had looked at him like a problem, the way he was handed off to a social worker like luggage. No comfort, no one explaining anything. Just a system that swallowed him whole. He spent years bouncing from home to home. Some were okay, some were cruel, but none of them stayed. Jacob learned to survive by keeping quiet, working hard, and pretending he didn't care. He built his empire on silence, never talking about his past, never letting anyone see the cracks. Until now. Now, a little girl named Emily had curled up in his car, unknowingly opening a door he'd locked for decades. Jacob looked at the empty hallway where her bedroom door was closed. She had no idea he knew exactly what her nightmares felt like. She didn't need to be dragged out of another car. She needed someone to reach in and pull her out of the darkness gently. Jacob had money, connections, power. But none of that made him a father. Still, maybe it could help him be a protector. And in that quiet night, with the city glowing outside and a sleeping child behind a closed door, he made a decision he never thought he'd make. He would not let history repeat itself. Not for her. Not this time. Morning light poured into the penthouse like gold, brushing against the tall windows and warming the cold walls. The city had already come to life. Horns honking, footsteps rushing down sidewalks, people chasing success. But inside Jacob Miller's home, something else stirred, a quiet sense of purpose. Emily was still asleep in the guest room, curled up in a nest of blankets that finally felt safe. For the first time, her face looked peaceful. No fear, no flinching in her sleep, just the steady rhythm of rest a child should always have. Jacob sat at the kitchen counter, a cup of black coffee in his hands. He hadn't slept, but his mind was clear. His heart, though, was heavy. He opened his laptop and began making calls. The first was to his longtime lawyer, Mark. a man who had handled million-dollar contracts but never something like this. Then came a call to a respected child psychologist he had met at a charity gala. She remembered Jacob as the silent billionaire, the one who always donated but never gave speeches. Now he had something to say. Within hours, the two professionals were at his home, seated in his polished living room, flipping through files that made Jacob's stomach twist. Emily's foster history was long, cold, and cruel. 4 homes in 3 years. 2 of them had official complaints, one for verbal abuse, another for lack of supervision. Nothing had been done. The therapist frowned, holding up one page. She stopped speaking for a while, she said softly. It's a common trauma response in children who feel unseen. Then came another file, one Jacob hadn't expected. It wasn't just Emily. There were dozens of other children, especially children of color, who had been in the same group homes. The records whispered what the system didn't say out loud. Black and brown children being punished more often, ignored more quickly, transferred more frequently. The therapist's voice dropped. Some of the kids were labeled as problematic, just for asking for second helpings at dinner. Some were isolated for having emotional outbursts after abuse. Jacob leaned back, stunned. He had always believed in progress, in systems, in logic. He had built an empire on clean code and smart algorithms, changing the world with tech. But here was a world tech hadn't touched, a world where race and poverty still decided your value, a world where no one was watching until it was too late. He stared down at Emily's file, her small photo stapled to the corner. She had been failed by every adult who was supposed to protect her. And somehow, by complete accident or maybe fate, she had ended up in the back seat of his car. No, not by accident. By design. He felt it deep in his bones. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the Emilys, every child who had been labeled, tossed around, shut out. He closed the folder slowly and looked up at his lawyer. What would it take, Jacob asked, to keep her safe, for good? The lawyer hesitated. You mean adoption? Jacob didn't blink. I mean whatever it takes. That afternoon, he called an emergency board meeting, not to talk numbers or investors. He was done talking about stocks. He was ready to talk about souls. Weeks turned into months, and the once quiet guest room in Jacob Miller's penthouse slowly became a space filled with laughter, crayon drawings, and tiny footsteps running down polished floors. With the help of his lawyer and child services, Jacob became Emily's legal foster guardian. The paperwork was long, the interviews intense, but Jacob never wavered. Not once. He attended every meeting, answered every question. He wasn't doing it for image. He was doing it for her. Emily, who used to whisper and flinch, now giggled and sang. He enrolled her in one of the best private schools in the city. She was given new books, new clothes, and new friends. But more importantly, she was given stability, a soft place to land, a roof that didn't leak, a bed that always stayed hers. She picked out her own puppy from the local shelter, a floppy-eared mutt with big brown eyes. She named him Buttons because his nose looked like one. Each night, Jacob, this once emotionally distant CEO, sat by her bed with a storybook in hand. Sometimes she asked for fairy tales. Sometimes she just wanted to talk about her day. And he listened, truly listened, as if nothing in the world mattered more than her words. For the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, Emily smiled without fear. And Jacob? He found something success had never given him: peace. Months later, Jacob stood at a press conference in front of reporters, cameras, and a room packed with business leaders and city officials. He wore the same tailored suit, but the man inside it had changed. He took a deep breath, then began. Months ago, I got into my car and found a little girl in the back seat. She wasn't stealing. She wasn't dangerous. She was hiding from a world that had already decided she didn't matter. The room fell silent. She looked at me and said, "No one comes for me." That one sentence changed the course of my life. He told them everything, not for praise, but because the world needed to know. He spoke of Emily's journey, the broken system, the invisible kids of every color, white, black, Latino, Asian, Native American, who are judged too fast, helped too late, and forgotten far too often. And then he made an announcement. Safe Start, a new nonprofit under the Miller Tech Foundation, a national project to provide emergency housing, trauma counseling, education, and long-term foster support for children of all backgrounds, especially those who had been failed by the system because of race, poverty, or age. There would be no application fees, no red tape, no discrimination, just help, real help. His final words moved everyone in the room. We cannot call ourselves successful if we turn away from the forgotten. Whether white, black, Latino, Asian, Native, every child matters. I didn't save her. She saved me. A tear slid down his cheek as the cameras flashed, not as a CEO, but as a man who had finally remembered who he was and who he was meant to be. And Emily? She sat in the front row, her legs swinging off the chair, holding buttons in her lap. She smiled at Jacob the entire time, knowing she was no longer a shadow in the back seat. She was home. Final lesson. This world doesn't break because of darkness. It breaks when good people look away. But healing starts the moment one person chooses to see what others ignore and decides to love anyway.